Welcome to the Digital Jesus platform with me, Father Frank. Delighted in a moment we're going to bring into the studio Donal Smyth. Donal, the team met Donal at the Divine Mercy conference in the RDS in 2023, just a few months ago. And Donal was telling the team that he had a story to tell, so we decided, as you know, as part of our Divine Mercy Novena this year, that we would bring Donal into the studio to share that story. So I'm simply going to bring Donal in and hand over to him. So, good evening, Donal. You're very welcome.
Good evening, Father Frank. Thank you.
Okay, well, listen, that's all they're getting is way of introduction. So I was just saying to Donal before we went into recording that I'm hearing this for the first time myself. So looking forward to hearing Donal's story. And once he's finished, I'll come back in just to wrap things up and to say thank you on behalf of our Divine Mercy team here. So, Donal, it's over to you, my friend. Good luck and God bless you.
Thank you, Father. It's great to be here on this program, Divine Mercy, because it's very much central to my conversion experience as well, and my journey in my faith. I was the eldest of three. Grew up in a Catholic family with my parents, mom and dad, and my mom had a very deep faith and was very much influenced by that. My parents practiced their faith, and I was always went to Mass on a Sunday and holy days with my family. I was very privileged to be educated by the Loretto nuns starting in school, who prepared me very well for my first Holy Communion. So I got a great grounding in my faith up to the age of 7, and that's relevant to my story later, because really that was the strongest of the formation that I'd had in my Catholic faith as a boy. I was very blessed with a grandmother that I was very close to. She was my mother's mother, was widowed very young and left with 9 children on a farm. And she knew hard times, but she was so close to God and her faith and our Blessed Mother. Her faith really was central to her life. And I spent a lot of time as a child with her, and she was living about an hour away from me. So every chance I had, I spent with her on holidays from school and on the farm with my uncle as well. So it was a very special time for me. My grandmother prayed the rosary nightly, and I didn't have that at home because both my parents were working and worked hard, and I suppose they were just so tired that we didn't have that at night. We had our night prayers when we went to bed, but we didn't have the rosary. So I had a foundation of the rosary being prayed every night, any time I spent with my grandmother. And she was a very quiet woman, but one thing she was very strict about, and that was my prayers. So I wasn't let out of the house in the morning until I knelt before the Sacred Heart and said my prayers, and also prayed the Angelus at 12 noon and 6 p.m. And nothing else mattered. She didn't care what I did, but prayer was very important. I'm very much reminded of her now as we approach Lent, because then she took Lent very seriously, and Holy Week in particular, and Good Friday was a very black day in my grandmother's house. So I have a great memory of that, which really returned to me in later years. I served Mass as an older boy and felt very privileged to do that. I then moved into secondary school, and I felt that there was very poor faith formation in secondary school. It was more concentrated on discussing worldly affairs. So I felt let down possibly in relation to that. So my faith really hadn't been nourished, having made my confirmation at age 12. I was very ambitious as a young boy and worked hard in school, and had decided at 14, I really felt led that I had a vocation to law, and I wanted to be a solicitor. And that was very much a focus for my school life. And as I say, I worked very hard because I needed to get good results to get the points to go to university. So during this time, particularly around my Leaving Cert year, I came very deeply into my faith through really prayer of desperation to God as I was studying hard and hoping that I would get the points necessary to pursue my chosen study. And I came across a very good saying there. I think it's St. Ignatius of Loyola that pray as if everything depends on God and work as if everything depends on you. So I very much lived out that motto when I was in secondary school and preparing for my Leaving Cert. And I would go to Mass for Lent as well. So, and I remember continuing on with Mass during the summer after my Leaving Cert in praying for good results. So thank God my prayers were answered, and I did get into university to pursue law. I had a poor relationship with my father. As I say, I was the eldest, the only boy. I felt that my father was very strict and harsh with me at times. He was my dad is a great man, and he provided for me very well and gave me great encouragement in relation to my studies. But I didn't feel any real connection with my father. And I now know that I really had a serious father wound, which developed later, which I'll share with you as the talk goes on. But because I didn't have a good relationship with my father, I couldn't have a relationship with God the Father or Jesus as a result. But because I had such a good relationship with my mother and my grandmother, I had a great relationship with our Blessed Mother. And she was the one that I really went to in prayer. And I wore the scapular as a young man, and would pray the Memorare every night and the prayer to St. Michael the Archangel, my guardian angel, and my act of contrition. And the interesting thing is that even when my faith grew very weak and cold, I said those prayers faithfully every night. I went through college, and while going through UCD, I remained very strong in my faith. My daily prayers, which weren't a lot, but were still faithful, going to Mass for Lent, Sundays and holy days, of course, as well. And I lived a good life when I was in university, and I had a nice time, but I lived a good, chaste life at that stage. I qualified then, and I started working, and I was now in my early 20s, and I felt that there was something wrong with me, that I was old-fashioned, that I needed to get with the world, that guys like me didn't go to Mass. They lived, kind of wild lifestyles with women and nightclubs and partying and all that. And I really felt that I needed to change. And I became more worldly. Now, thank God, through all of this, I still remained firm in attending Mass on Sunday and holy days, and would have considered myself a good Catholic, even though I wasn't living the life of a Catholic. I only went to confession once a year. That was usually at Christmas, maybe twice at Easter as well. But I wasn't making a proper confession, and I wasn't living my life in obedience to the Ten Commandments. I based my identity really on worldly success, in working long hours, with a view to earning money that I could buy things that I wanted, which would be kind of demonstrate how successful I had become. I worked very long hours, and I was very exhausted. I was working 6 days a week, and I was also partying as well on Saturday nights, usually in Dublin, being out half the night, going to Mass on a Sunday, but usually in a state of being hungover and not really being able to focus on what was happening. As my faith weakened, I also became very unhappy in myself, very empty, despairing, and I would also say that depression had set in. I felt nothing in myself, absolutely joyless. I couldn't even smile. My smile was from my teeth out, but I had no joy actually in my heart. And because I was working so hard and so stressed out, I couldn't understand how people could actually smile or laugh, because to me, life was so serious, and it was all about getting ahead and achieving that next goal. So anybody that was smiling or laughing, particularly other men, I would envy them, but at the same time, I would be getting angry in myself because I couldn't understand how they could be so relaxed in themselves. Basically, I was like the walking dead in myself. I know that I looked terrible, completely stressed out, anxious, and very tensed up all the time. I'd say my quality of sleep was very poor as well. As I got older then in my 20s, my relationship with my father worsened, and I now allowed hatred to develop in my heart around my dad for all the things I felt he hadn't done for me in my childhood, spending no time with me, not encouraging me in any way, particularly in sports, and not really kind of mentoring me as I felt a father should. And I became more angry with him, and the hatred was growing stronger and stronger in my heart, and to such a stage that I was actually saying that I hated my father, which is a shocking thing to say. And of course, when we allow hatred into our hearts, Satan then has an opening which he takes hold of in us, and that just grows stronger and stronger. So as my life was continuing the same fashion, I also had started taking an interest in New Age, and had been introduced to Reiki and yoga and the Enneagram. And I found myself going from course to course with all of these New Age things. One thing led to another. Now, thank God I didn't go too deeply into Reiki, because I know how serious it is from a spiritual sense, and how dangerous it is to the soul. So I was kind of on the outskirts of all of this, but I did notice in myself that when I started doing Reiki, that my faith actually weakened even more, and it didn't matter to me if I missed Sunday Mass through being out the night before. Now, thank God that happened maybe once or twice, but my attitude, I noticed that my attitude was changing. I also noticed through my involvement in New Age that I was going into even more and more despair and depression in myself. And of course, I now know how wrong all of that was, and I have repented of it. And it gave me huge insight into New Age and the wrongness of it, and certainly how dangerous it is. I did a little bit on yoga as well, but just did a course in it. The interesting thing is that when I started exploring all these New Age practices, I actually really they didn't really appeal to me, even though I wanted to kind of see what they were like. Of course, what I was really I was looking for God, of course, in the wrong place, and I'm very conscious that a lot of people today are becoming involved in New Age. In February then 2005, I was very blessed to meet a man called Larry Cummins, living in the south of Ireland, and Larry has gone to his eternal reward in the last few years, and may the Lord have mercy on his soul. And Larry had a great charism in praying for the souls in purgatory. And I was friendly with Larry's daughter, Ailish, and she told me that he was coming to a church near me here, and that invited me to come along and to meet him. So I met him for the first time, and I sat down with him, and he asked me, was I praying the rosary? And I said, no, I wasn't. And he instructed me to begin praying the rosary and to pray the rosary daily. Now, at this time as well, I had become aware of Medjugorje, and the previous year, a very good friend of mine had been to Medjugorje, and she was telling me all about her experience there, and I felt very drawn to go to Medjugorje. And it was Larry Cummins' daughter, Ailish, as well, who was bringing a group to Medjugorje in 2005. And she invited me to come along. And I paid my deposit immediately because I felt very drawn to going to Medjugorje. So I started praying the rosary daily because Larry had asked me to do it and I wouldn't let him down. And I started to experience kind of different phenomena when I was praying the rosary every night. And I knew that something big was going to happen in Medjugorje for me, but I didn't know what it was. Certainly if somebody had mentioned a conversion experience, I would have said, but sure, why would I need to be converted? I'm such a great Catholic, because in my own mind, I thought that God was so lucky to have me, that there's not many young guys my age going around, going to Mass on a Sunday and holy days, and what a wonderful man I was. Far from the truth it was, and I'm sure God was smiling because he knew what he had in store for me. So I was praying the rosary anyhow daily, and Satan wasn't very happy about that because I was getting spiritual attacks during the night in my sleep or whatever, which didn't faze me in the least, but would leave me breathless and gasping for air, and I felt very disturbed during my sleep or whatever. But I never even told Andy about it. Now when I look back on it, I know what it was. And so faithfully prayed the rosary every night. And we were traveling to Medjugorje then for Youth Week in 2005. So I remember the details of all of this so exactly, because I had this great sense that something was going to happen to me. Now, I also had the benefit of a great friend who was kind of giving me some instruction in relation to spiritual matters, and gave me some CDs, some very good CDs and powerful testimonies of conversion, and generally was kind of preparing me for my trip spiritually to Medjugorje. So we arrived on the 31st of July 2005. It was a Sunday night. We arrived about 1:30 in the morning and pulled up outside Dubrovnik House, where we were staying directly opposite St. James's Church. And the first thing I saw was a big sign for Guinness Stout. And I was so delighted. I was there with 8 of my friends. There was 9 of us all together. And I thought I was going to have a great time every night. I'd be out partying. And I was full of the joys of this kind of great time I was going to have. So we arrived into the house anyhow, and the family had prepared some food for us. And we were sitting around at the table having supper. And there's a lovely group of women there from Dublin who I subsequently became friendly with. And they were truly deep in their faith, and they were praising the Lord and thanking the Lord. And at this stage, I'd never been exposed to anything like this. And I thought, these people are crazy. And if I could have got a bus out of Medjugorje that night and gone back to the airport and came home, I would have done that. I just couldn't wait to get out of there. I went like a bullet up the stairs to bed. I said, this place is just, I don't know what it is. So I woke up the next morning anyhow to the bells ringing out in St. James's Church, and we went to Mass there at 10 a.m. And I was sitting at Mass, whatever, and I was just saying to myself, what am I doing here? What have I done? How am I going to put a week in here in Medjugorje? Like, is this it really? Like, what is so special about here? So shortly after Mass, anyhow, I kind of was at a bit of a loss, and I was wandering around, and it became very tearful and despairing in myself, and the tears started to flow out of me. I couldn't start crying. Now, I was watching guys walking around with rosary beads and all that, and I was wondering, have they no self-respect that they're seen out in public holding a rosary beads? Like, have they lost the plot altogether? And here I was, tears streaming out of me, couldn't stop the tears, was so proud, and I've never really cried. And I was embarrassed as well, and just thinking, you know, this isn't normal, that I can't stop crying. So before I'd gone to Medjugorje, somebody else had recommended the Adoration Chapel beside St. James's Church, to go in there. There's adoration there every day. Now, I didn't know what adoration was, and I'd never been to adoration before, but I was so low on myself. At one stage, I was actually sitting on the ground outside St. James's Church, crying my eyes out, that I took myself into the Adoration Chapel, and I sat before the Blessed Sacrament for a while that afternoon, and the tears just kept kept flowing. And at this stage, I was becoming quite desperate, and I started calling out to Jesus, Jesus, please help me. I can't go on like this anymore. I'm so full of despair. I'm so happy. I feel so unhappy. I feel so down and out that I just can't continue like this. So that night, Our Lady was appearing to Ivan on Apparition Hill. So the 9 of us decided to head up to Apparition Hill, get up early, and take our positions on the hill there, whatever, waiting for the apparition. I brought a prayer book with me as well, and I really sat on that hilltop that night, just really begging Jesus from the bottom of my heart to help me, that I just couldn't continue living life like this, that I had no life. I was just so miserable. And I really prayed fervently for those couple of hours before the apparition. One of the girls with us walked with the aid of sticks, and she wasn't able to climb up the hill herself. So myself and another chap brought her up in a fireman's grip up the hill that night to be with us. So Our Lady appeared to Ivan, and just at the end of the apparition, I had this tremendous experience. I describe it as a frying pan over my head, where the Holy Spirit just poured through me. It was like getting a severe electric shock, that it just went through my whole body, and I felt kind of electrified, really, in a way, and filled with the graces of the Holy Spirit. I had this joy in me that I'd never experienced before. It wasn't a worldly joy, and I was jumping around the place with myself. I was so excited. So the girl that we brought up, anyhow, we brought her back down, but we had walked up the hill. But I actually brought her down, running down that hill. How the girl isn't dead, I don't know. But I was just so excited. And that joy continued. That evening we went for something to eat, and I decided that I'm going to run back into Medjugorje. I had my running shoes on, and I ran all the way back into Medjugorje. I was so excited. I couldn't believe having this feeling. I couldn't believe that I could actually feel as happy as I did. I feel that way. So I went to bed that night, and my friends noticed this as well, because they could see the change in me as well. I knew that they noticed, but I didn't say anything about my experience because I didn't know really what it was. So I went to bed that night anyhow, and thinking, well, that's the end of that anyhow. That was a once off. And I woke up the following morning, on Tuesday morning, one eye open first, the second eye, am I still alive? How am I feeling? And I was feeling great, the same as I was the night before. So that Tuesday then, I was kind of walking around in a trance. I was so happy and so joyful. And I said to Jesus that afternoon, if this is what you have to offer, I want to follow you. And as you know, Jesus takes us at our word. And he started then purification on me. So thank God the following day, Wednesday then, I went to Holy Confession and made a general confession of all of my life, as best as I could at that stage, whatever. And so the joy continued all that week. It was very noticeable now to my other friends, because they wouldn't have known me to be that joyful and to be that happy. So I really lived that week in a very joyful place through that wonderful experience I'd had on the Monday night. So as we approached the weekend then, we were getting ready to go home, and I did not want to go home. And the reason I didn't want to go home was because I didn't want to return to my old life. I was terrified that I would leave Medjugorje and that it would all disappear, because I was now praying the rosary many times during the day in Medjugorje, and I'd learned about fasting and the 5 stones that Our Lady promotes as well in Medjugorje. So I was resolved that when I return to Ireland, that I wanted to change my life. But I was terrified that, as I say, that I wouldn't have the commitment to do that. So when I returned back to Ireland anyhow, I remained faithful to praying a number of rosaries a day at that time, and started changing my life. The Lord, of course, had a lot of purification to do for me, and he really took me out of a group of friends that I had that would have been very much associated with socializing and partying and all that. And it was very painful for me. I got some very good advice from one of the ladies that I'd met at the table. And she said to me that, she said two things to me. She said, firstly, she asked me, how comfortable is your bedroom? And I said, I don't know, because I don't spend much time there. And she said, make sure that you have a very comfortable bedroom, that you'll need it when you return home. And secondly, she said to me, watch your old life as you know it go down the toilet. So I didn't kind of take that too seriously before I left Medjugorje, but boy, did I take it seriously when I got home, because that's exactly what happened. I was spending a lot of time in my bedroom praying and reading, spiritual reading, and also my life as I knew it, the partying, nightclubs, socializing with that particular group of friends, that all basically disappeared as well. As I say, it was very, very painful. I cried a lot over friends that I felt that had walked away, and it was very upsetting for me. But of course, the Lord had his plan, and he knew what he needed to do with me, and he couldn't have done that work on me if I continued in that group of friends who were lovely and are lovely people. But it just, for me, the Lord had a different plan for me. So the interesting thing is that I was going through such a purification that I actually wasn't able to make contact with that lady until the following April, because I actually just couldn't pick up the phone to talk to her, because to tell her how I was getting on, because I'd have been crying so much I wouldn't have been able to say anything. But when I did manage to speak to her the following year, she said, I can't believe you phoned me. She said, I've been praying so much for you. And I know a lot of people were praying for me around this time, because, of course, when I came home as well, and my mom noticed I was wearing the scapular, could see the scapular under my T-shirt, and I was speaking so much about Medjugorje that she just couldn't believe the change in me, and talking about praying the rosary, and she thought it was a fad and that it would disappear. I talked earlier there about my relationship with my dad, and how I'd allowed hatred to grow in my heart. When I was in Medjugorje, the Lord put it on my heart that I had to forgive my father, and I took that very seriously, and I knew I had to forgive my father, and it's something that I kind of dwelt on my return home. And I'd spoken to my mom about it as well, because she would have witnessed the strained relationship between my father and myself, and which would have created an atmosphere at home when I would have gone home to visit my parents. So between leading up to Christmas, anyhow, I decided that I was going to speak with my dad. I didn't know how I was going to broach it, but that I was going to tackle it head on. So Christmas 2005, I was at home with my parents, and I decided on St. Stephen's Day that I was going to take my dad out for a walk, and that I would apologise to him. And I told my mom before we went out, and of course I knew that she would be praying for me as well. So I've said it straight out to my dad, that I was very sorry for all the things I'd said to him and for my behaviour, and that I loved him very much. And I told him that I'd allowed hatred to build up in my heart and how wrong that was. And my dad, in all fairness, was very taken aback, and he said he didn't really notice anything, that he didn't actually feel any of that. So we had a lovely walk and a great chat, and went for a couple of pints afterwards. And when we returned home that evening for dinner, my mum said that the minute I walked in the back door into the kitchen, she knew that a great healing had taken place. And indeed it had. And the following day, my dad said to me, would you like to go for a walk again? So we did. We continued on for the few days I was at home, going for the walk, going for a few pints. and there was just such a radical change in our relationship, thank God. And that continued on then, that continued on and started that great forgiveness, whatever, which has had a huge impact in our family. I also want to talk about my sister, Aisling, who was not practicing her faith. And I knew that she was searching as well. And I really felt that she needed to go to Medjugorje. And I'd said it to her on a number of occasions since my return about going to Medjugorje. And she said she'd love to go. But she had a young child at the time, and herself and her husband had a business, and they just had a lot going on. So she said, look, I will go. I'd love to go. I will go sometime, but just not this year. But I was kind of insisting that she would go because I knew that she really needed it. So the time had come to collect in the money for the flights to go to Medjugorje, and I decided that I had really given up at this stage because Aisling had said, no, not this year. So I said, that's fine. It's not meant to be. When we returned from Medjugorje, Eilish and myself had set up a prayer group, which is in the same format as the prayer group that Our Lady had given to the visionaries in Medjugorje. So we started that in August 2005. And one night then in February 2006, after the prayer meeting, which is in my home, I was up in bed and I felt this prompting that I was to write to my sister Aisling and to invite her to Medjugorje. So I went down, and the prompting was quite insistent, and I believe it was our Blessed Mother that was in making me really insisting that I do this. So I went down and got some pen and paper and came back up to bed, whatever. And when I put the pen to paper, the pen just took off. So I said that I really felt, Aisling should go to Medjugorje, whatever. So I posted the letter the next day anyhow. And the following day at 9 o'clock at work, I got a phone call from my sister Aisling, and I thought there was something wrong. And I said, was everything okay? And she said, it's not. She said, I'm sitting at the kitchen table. I'm after getting your letter. And I said, I said to my woman, she'll think that I'm mad. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And she said, I have to go. She said, I have to go to Medjugorje with you this year because firstly, she said, that wasn't your handwriting because I can read it. And secondly, she said, it's not a language that you would use. She said, it was like a lady's handwriting, a lady's language, whatever. And she said, I really feel this is a calling from Our Lady. She said, I have to go. So my sister Aisling came with us to Medjugorje then for Youth Week again in 2006. And Aisling was big into shopping and fashion and all that. And I was kind of worried that when she hit Medjugorje that it should be straight to the shops. So we walked out of Dubrovnik house and I just looked up to the sky and I said to our Blessed Mother, you take care of her. I got her here. I don't know what I'm going to do now. But my sister Aisling had an almost instant conversion. She hit the ground running. It was just absolutely amazing. And she had such a conversion that she was almost becoming a pain for me that week because she was reminding me about do this and do that. And I was kind of saying, it's, relax. And just before we left Medjugorje that week, she had a tremendous week and, of course, was on the phone to her husband every day. And I'd say that poor man thought that she'd lost the plot. She insisted that she would get me a book on fasting. And I said, I really don't want to be fasting on a Wednesday and a Friday on bread and water. I said, I tried it last year when I returned and it didn't work out. But she was insistent. So she got me the book and she put it into my hand. And I got a grace for fasting on Wednesdays and Fridays from Our Lady through my sister. I didn't want it. It's not something I would have done. But through the grace of God, I was given the strength to do it. And so that was a gift. I say it's a gift because it's nothing got to do with me. And I'm just sharing that as with you. I thank God I've been fasting on Wednesday and Friday since 2006. I struggle with it at times, but in its own way, I kind of look forward to it as well. And but that was a tremendous gift to me, for which I'm very grateful. So through the forgiveness then with my father, and my parents ended up coming to Medjugorje as well. And we were a family where a lot of forgiveness was needed within the family. And thank God, great healings have taken place. Both my parents, who always practiced their faith, have come into their faith more strongly. I continued to return to Medjugorje every year, and for a while brought kind of a small group with me as well, and that continued. The changes then in my life since my conversion have been profound, and I've been given great gifts of courage and fortitude and perseverance. And there was a time before my conversion that I wouldn't want to be seen going into the church. I'd certainly be there for Mass on a Sunday and holy days, as I said, but even going to Mass for Lent, I would be kind of quiet about it, and I wouldn't say anything about it. I would never have spoken about my faith openly, and indeed I might have tried to conceal it and pretend or say that, well, look, I'm not particularly religious, would try and hide it. I certainly wouldn't have stood up or contradicted somebody that spoke against the Catholic Church or the teachings, or who were saying something heretical. But the Lord gave me tremendous courage to step up and step out in the parish where I'm living. It's a small town, so basically really everybody knows everybody. But the Lord really got me very much involved in the church where I'm living, and in adoration, involved in the Two Hearts Vigils on the first Friday and first Saturday, and also then leading the Divine Mercy Sunday here in Nina. So Divine Mercy Sunday is a very important part of my life, and of course the whole Divine Mercy as well. And in 2006, following my conversion experience, I went to the Divine Mercy Conference for the first time, and met Don Devani there, and was just bowled over by the whole experience, and to see another man in his faith, because I really didn't have that many role models of men practicing their faith, and certainly not at the level that Don Devani was leading the Divine Mercy Conference. John's presence on the stage, and I've told him this since, left a huge imprint on me. It was a huge evangelization. I didn't need to hear anything at all, but just to see another man practicing his faith. And indeed, it was a hard road for me following my conversion, because I didn't have any male friends who practiced their faith as well. And I prayed very much about that. And of course, as we all know, the Lord is not to be outdone in generosity. And he's given me many great men friends who practice their faith. Of course, I have loads of very good women friends who practice their faith, and that's very important as well. And they've been a huge guide and great example to me. But I just needed to kind of have the male influence as well, and experience the male spirituality. Through this great gift of strength and fortitude, then the Lord then prepared me really for speaking up in relation to the referendum that was held on marriage in the south of Ireland in 2015. So I spoke out about that and the importance of marriage between one man and one woman, and spoke without fear or favour. And that was a great gift for me, that I didn't hide the true teachings of the Catholic Church in relation to marriage. We had the further referendum then in 2018 on abortion. And I remember being at a talk here given by two girls from pro-life movement who'd come down from Dublin one night, and they asked us in the group, would you be willing to give 9 months of your life, as it takes that time to form the baby in the womb, to stand up for pro-life? Of course, I was always pro-life, but I never actually stood up and stood out And so here I was now going around knocking on doors with other people, and for me that was a huge, it was a huge test, I suppose, of my faith, and a huge challenge for me as well. That we're meeting people who were sometimes hostile, mostly indifferent, trying to engage them in talking about the child in the womb. And we did quite a lot of door to door, and that's something that I'm very grateful to God for giving me that courage to stand up and stand out, and indeed being out maybe socially, whatever, in situations where somebody might ask me prior to the referendum what my views were, and I'd express my views, they would walk away or turn their backs or try to start an argument with me, whatever, which I didn't engage in. So that really is a huge fruit for me of my conversion. So following on from that then as well, I love traveling to the Marian Apparition sites throughout the world. I've been to Fatima a number of times as well. I've also been to Garba and Dal, and of course to our lovely Knock in Ireland, which is so important. The only apparitional site in the world so far where Jesus appeared with our Blessed Mother, and of course St. John and St. Joseph. So it will be a hugely important in the future in this country. And there was a time that if I was driving past Knock, I wouldn't even have stopped to go in, that I would have said to myself that I didn't have the time to do it. So the fruits of the conversion in my life as well have been the sacrament of penance, Holy Confession. And I realised in Medjugorje how important it is to have regular confession. I try now to go to confession every week, examine my conscience as best as I can on a daily basis. So I have plenty to tell when I go every week, even though prior to that I would have thought that I had no sins at all. That the bottom line for me was that I'd never murdered anybody. So I didn't feel that I had any need to go to confession at all. But as we come deeper into our faith, we realise how we do sin and how we do offend God. I'm very strong on confession, also adoration as well. I just feel that the Lord really has formed me very much through an infusion of knowledge, and spending time with the Lord in adoration, and reminded of that lovely story that St. John Vianney, the Curé of Ars, recounted, that he noticed this poor man coming in every evening and would just sit in front of the tabernacle and would remain silent. And he was doing this on a daily basis. And St. John Vianney asked him at one stage, what does he do when he comes into the church? And he said that I stare at Jesus and Jesus stares at me. So it just reminds me so much of how important adoration is. And also, of course, forgiveness. And I'm challenged by that constantly, and about the need to forgive. The forgiveness is an attitude of the mind, of the will. It doesn't come from the heart necessarily. We have to make the decision to forgive whatever actually happened, and no matter how bad it is, and to pray to God for the gift of forgiveness as well. If this is something very difficult that we need to forgive, if somebody has hurt us very badly or some terrible act has been committed against us, it is so important that we make the decision, that we decide, I want to forgive that person. And then our feelings and our heart follows after that. I'm reminded about that beautiful prayer, the Our Father. When we pray the Our Father, we ask God to forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So what we're saying to God is, forgive me as much as I forgive somebody else. So it's very serious from that point of view. And I have to remind myself of that as well. I also remind myself that if I let on forgiveness, come into my heart, that I'm opening the door to Satan. And once he gets a chink in the door, then it becomes a foothold. And I know from my own experience with my dad how that had grown stronger and stronger, to such an extent that I was actually saying that I hated my father, which of course is very sinful. But that's what had actually happened in my life, that I had become consumed by that hatred. So I've learned how important forgiveness is, and it's something that I have to remind myself of on a daily basis, because we're in situations daily where people might annoy us or offend us, or we might be living with somebody or working with somebody who offends us on a continuous basis. And so it's very difficult. It's an ongoing challenge, and indeed it's something that I'm after bringing to confession as well, that I'm just allowing unforgiveness to come up into my heart. I just say sometimes to people that it's so important that we remain in a state of grace, and that we are fastidious about our soul, that we keep it really as clean as we can. And I'm reminded of cleaning windows, and not that I do clean windows too often, but if I do actually decide to clean windows, I don't want to stop until I've got every mark or blemish off that window, both outside and inside, so that I can see right through it, and there's no stain on it. And that's what I say to myself as well about my soul, that it's so important that I'm that fastidious about my soul as well. And I was sharing a story with a group of people about my nephew, who was 8 years of age at the time, and he was making his first Holy Communion and first confession. And I was saying to him about confession, how important it is now that you continue going to confession after you make your first confession. And I said to him, can you imagine now if you didn't wash for months, what would you be like? And he said, I'd be like stink. And I said, you would. And I said, and so it is with our souls as well. And I remember reading a story about St. Padre Pio, that he'd actually bilocated to some city. I think it may have been Vienna. And he saw this lady beautifully dressed. She was a member of the royal family. And he approached her because he could see the state of her soul. And he said, Madam, he said, you're dressed beautifully on the outside, but your soul is absolutely stink on the inside. And if you die, you will go to hell. And she initially dismissed Padre Pio, but he kept speaking to her, whatever. And finally, she relented and made a full confession of her life to restore her to a state of grace. And so it's very important. We take so much care of our bodies, washing ourselves and dressing nicely, and sometimes we can neglect our souls very badly. So it's something that I feel very strongly about in my own life, and that I speak where I can as well, is Holy Confession, and particularly now as we're approaching the beautiful time of Easter, and in particular Holy Week as well. And indeed, the priests have heard it all before. No matter what anybody has to confess, they've heard it all before. You're not going to shock the priest, and he who is in persona Christi, of course, and it's to Jesus that you are actually speaking to when you go to confession. And I've read that heaven rejoices when a person returns to the sacrament of confession and makes a good confession. And so now is a wonderful time in Lent, as we approach Holy Week, to take your time and maybe sit down with a pen and paper, as I do, just to make notes on my confession. And particularly if I have a difficult confession to make, that it's easier to read out what I actually have on the piece of paper, rather than fumbling around with the words, and just to say it as it is, and to be precise and concise in naming the sin. There's no need to go into a whole backstory as to how it had happened, unless you need to put it in context for the priest hearing your confession. But to be very straightforward, in describing the sin, and to say it as it is, because we should really be so meticulous about making a good confession. And of course, then we also have this beautiful time of Divine Mercy Sunday, the first Sunday after Easter, and the chaplet then of Divine Mercy, which begins on Good Friday. And the promises given by Jesus to Saint Faustina for this are absolutely amazing. It should be spread all over the world, this wonderful news, that, we pray the chaplet starting on Good Friday, we finish on Easter Saturday, and with Divine Mercy Sunday then the following day. We pray the chaplet, we go to Holy Confession, and we go to Holy Mass on Divine Mercy Sunday, where the image is blessed, and we kiss the image as well. And we fulfill all the conditions in relation to the promises given by Jesus to Saint Faustina. And Jesus told Saint Faustina that the slate is wiped clean of all of our sins. Once we have confessed them, we pray the chaplet, we've taken part in the Divine Mercy Sunday celebrations. I mean, this should be shouted from the rooftops. It's so powerful, and it's something that I really live from year to year for, because I know that whatever has happened in the previous year, and of course I have confessed it, that it's now wiped clean, that slate is clean. So what a wonderful gift that we have been given from heaven through Saint Faustina. So that really is an account of my conversion experience, and thank you for listening to me.
Donal, thank you. Wonderful stuff. As I say, you can never hear too many enough conversion stories, and relatable. So I hope that that finds people and maybe helps encourage and inspire them on their own faith journey if they're going through something similar. I said to you before I wasn't sure if what we would do after us, but listen, how's the head first and foremost? Because I know it's not easy to share a story like that. How's the head? Would you be happy to shoot the breeze for maybe 10, 15 more minutes? Okay, well, there was a few things that jumped out at me, as I said then. I was just hearing it for the first time. So again, just appreciative of you sharing, but also just aware that it's heavy going when you're sharing, you're spilling your heart out, really telling your life story. So I'll try and go easy on you, in other words, is what I'm saying, Donal. So listen, just one of the first things that jumped out at me at the beginning of your story, you were saying how, and I hope I'm not putting words into your mouth here, but basically you were saying how you felt a little let down by your poor secondary school faith formation. I think that's a very relatable. I don't think there's any surprises there in the sense of it. I think it's an experience that many Catholics in particular have when it comes to secondary. The reason I think it was on my mind, because recently I was having this conversation with someone is confirmation too early, and the suggestion that it should be at secondary. I suppose what the thing I want to ask, you're obviously a well-educated man, is just if you had any suggestions or thoughts on the whole secondary education and faith formation.
Yes, Father. I think that I made my confirmation at age 12, so it's still in primary school, and I think I got a relatively good preparation for confirmation. I think, you see, when I was growing up, at least there was some faith in the home, whereas now it's unusual if there is faith in the home, if the parents are practicing. And unfortunately, a lot of teachers aren't practicing their faith either. And that's a difficulty as well. So if a young person doesn't have it at home and they're not hearing it in school, they have no chance whatsoever. And what I loved about my conversion experience was that I was hearing the truth, and I was hearing the teaching in very plain form. And children are open, and they're very much like sponges, and they want to hear the truth. And I know from groups in the south of Ireland, like Pure in Heart and Youth 2000, that when they're speaking to young people, that they go into the schools, that they actually have a captive audience, and that the majority will listen to them and are actually engaged. And I think the whole teaching of the Catholic faith may have to be taken out of the schools or separated in some way, because it's not been taught properly. Now, if you're going to a good Catholic school, and there are some good Catholic schools in the south of Ireland where the faith is being taught, and indeed I've come across a case in County Cork where a few of the secondary schools have decided to pray the rosary at lunchtime, and they're getting quite a take up from the students, which is very interesting. And you see, really, if the prayer is if it's at the heart in the school, where the rosary is being prayed, or where there's morning prayers, whatever, as I say, faith is caught, not taught. So if the example is being shown, but it really, I think, has to come from the teachers, from the top down, and also from the parents at home. Sadly, in the south of Ireland, it's really dwindling.
Thank you. No, it is. Thank you for sharing. It's a hot potato at the moment, as you know, and probably continue to be so. But that's interesting, Maybe we overthink it. Maybe simple devotional stuff at the heart of a Catholic school or ethos could be the answer.
Honestly, just to go into a church, and see a man kneeling in prayer, I think it's a huge evangelization, and great work has been done, with, say, the age group now, and they're, say, 18 plus into their early 30s through Pure in Heart and Youth 2000 here in the south, and they're capturing some good sports people who are speaking openly about their faith, and there's a great evangelization there, because a lot of young guys would look up to these good sportsmen, and they're aware that they're practicing their faith. So it's a great evangelization. I think that it's possibly going to come now. The future of our faith really is going to come from the young people, maybe once they get into their late teens and early 20s, and that they are evangelizing each other.
Yeah, you've maybe answered my next observation. The next couple of observations from your little testimonial, Donal. The one that jumped out was the whole idea of, you spoke rather painfully about, what I would call the company we keep, and how, because this is more, I suppose, for people that might be watching and listening to your story, because I know how difficult it can be and painful, and I think that's perhaps one of the big challenges, especially for young men, is to break, to set themselves free from, like you say, not often that it's bad people that they're around, but it's just that the company we keep can very much shape. And I suppose it ties into what you've just said and what you spoke about a bit later on in this idea of male faith role models today, or lack of, perhaps. So I know you've answered that a wee bit just in speaking there, but is there anything else you want to, maybe on that?
Yes, Father, I appreciate that it's very difficult for a young man to isolate himself, but But at the same time, it's very important to protect ourselves from people who don't have a good influence on us. And, you know, that saying, iron sharpens iron. But there's also the converse of that as well, that if you're hanging around in company that have loose morals, not practicing their faith, you know, you are going to be pulled down to that level as well. And indeed, I do find it hard at times. I'm very blessed to have a good close circle of men who practice their faith very strongly. So that's kind of the company that I'm mixing with most of the time. But we are living in the world, and sometimes I find myself in other company as well. Very nice guys, but they're worldly and they're not practicing their faith, and their language and their talk would really be worldly, and it's something that I would find very hard to take. And I really try not to spend too much time in that company, because I just feel that it will drag me down. Whereas when I'm spending time with people practicing their faith, good living people, I'm raised up. I feel lifted by it. And indeed, I'm actually doing the Exodus 90 program at the moment. I'm sure you've heard of it. And I'm in a great fraternity of men, and we have a meeting every week, and we give a report of how we're getting on. And that is very uplifting as well. Indeed, there's a lot of young men in that as well, in their 20s. And I have to say that I'm very taken by their deep faith and how they're living their lives. So there are a lot of young people, men and women, who are living very good lives, practicing their faith. And that's why it's important, I think, for somebody to get into an organisation like Youth 2000, Pure in Heart, or a prayer group that's meeting weekly, and that you're actually spending time with these people, and that they become your friends, and indeed may become a future spouse. That's so important.
Good stuff, Donal. Well, listen, you've kind of answered, because I was going to push you further and say, well, what kind of advice would you give, just for talking's sake? A young man's watching this and he's in that kind of bubble himself, but you've offered a few suggestions there. Let's just pick up a little bit more on the, because I suppose maybe one of the big problems for young men today is, like, social men's group aren't maybe just as readily available as they might have been, other than going down to the pub for a lot of young men these days. But you mentioned, I'm aware of Exodus. I'm not overly familiar with it, but I believe it's more of an online thing. So maybe there are people out there that haven't heard of Exodus 90, I think it's called. Would you say something a wee bit more on that? And perhaps if there are people watching that maybe if they don't have that social sphere, that another possibility of an online community, for instance.
Yes, Father. Exodus 90 is a 90-day retreat, really, which is, the preference is that it's held in person, but sometimes that's not possible. So it's held online, and there's a whole program a daily program of prayer, discipline, really to bring us closer to God, to free ourselves from the slavery of alcohol, addictions, and media, TV, radio, anything that doesn't give glory to God. It's really what men would have been living maybe 100 years ago, the lifestyle they would have led, where they would have had their daily prayer, the discipline of that, and really giving glory to God in their lives, rather than giving glory to the world in the form of everything it has to offer. So it's a very committed program. It finishes on Easter Saturday, but there is a continuation then. It continues in different formats throughout the year. The Exodus 90 is one such program, I suppose, that a man could get involved with. But I do feel very strongly for young men that there's such pressure now on them to compromise their morals, to engage in sexual activity before they get married, to be, drinking, taking drugs, etc., and all that. And it's very hard it must be very hard for a young man now to try and stay apart from all that, yet live in the world as well. So it's crucial, really, that a young man or woman would be part of some group, whether it's online or in person. So I don't know if you have Youth 2000 in the north. We have Youth 2000 here in the south. We also have Pure in Heart as well. I don't know of any other organizations that might capture that age group. But it is imperative to have some group, even if it was if you could find a local prayer group, maybe for young people, or where a priest might consider setting up a prayer group to gather young people together, that they could meet on a weekly basis. There are plenty of young men and women out there who are searching. I know that, and indeed, it's not easy for any age group, particularly as you get older, because the kind of upper age limit for Youth 2000 and Pure in Heart, I think, is 35. So where do you go then after that? And the Legion of Mary as well. I don't know what kind of they might attract, maybe an older age group, but even to go, even if you had to go online, to some kind of group outside of the country, even that are Catholic, but to have some connection, and with Zoom now and all of the technology, at least you can see each other face to face. But I don't know how a young person now could practice their faith and not have some support like that. And really, that's what happened to me in my 20s when I started working. I felt there was something wrong with me because nobody else seemed to be on that wavelength, and I became worldly instead of remaining firm in my faith. And that's what I would be concerned about, that somebody would grow lukewarm in their faith, and maybe their faith would disappear altogether.
Good stuff. Yeah, no, I know there's scatterings of groups like Youth 2000 in the north here. I'll be honest, my experience of kind of youth ministry, well, I'm a young priest in the north here, and if I would find it difficult to find where to go. So that paints a picture in itself that for most young people, the church is well off the radar, I think. But yeah, no, like you say, there's stuff out there if people look, if they're prepared to dig, I suppose. But that's the thing, you would need to do a fair bit of digging to find some support groups. The next thing I had noted down, Donal, this is more, again, a bit of just more of an observation. I was glad that you had mentioned, it was the whole idea of fasting as a gift, and not as much as something that we do, because I think the tendency when you think of fasting is, oh, this is something that I need to do. But I like the fact that you highlighted that fasting is a gift from God. It's not always necessarily something that we do or in control of, but that's my own experience, that fasting is most definitely a gift from God, to be cherished if you're blessed with it. And as you say, not always a gift that necessarily you want, but a gift nonetheless.
Father, it's the gift that keeps on giving. But I have to say that, strange as it may seem, I look forward to, on a Tuesday night, I'm actually looking forward to the fact that I'll be fasting on Wednesday or on Thursday night as well. I can't explain it. It does. It is. I see the benefits of it in myself. It's very powerful. As I say, it's not something that I would have embraced readily myself. But I see the benefits of it. Now, of course, I'm prudent as well, because I have to work. I have to work on a Wednesday and a Friday, and I have to be careful about my reactions as well on those days that I could be a bit edgy in myself. So I kind of, keep an eye on myself in that regard. But it is great for discipline and for disciplining the bodily senses. It's a great help with purity and the passions, and also in controlling my needs then to have food, and I must have food now, that I can be comfortable with being, hungry. And so there have been many benefits, and there are many benefits. I'm from reading about fasting as well, apart from spiritually as well, for the body as well, to give the body a break from, eating large amounts of food every day.
No, good stuff. I appreciate that. Just like I say, I wanted to highlight that because I think it's fasting something I feel we often approach with the wrong state of mind with it, perhaps, and that's why a lot of people maybe go wrong with it, because perhaps they don't approach it in the right spiritual sense. Okay, Donald, well, listen, just two final takeaways here to end on. These are just noting these. I was just delighted that you had put such an emphasis on confession. In particular, as you know, they call Medjugorje is a big part of your story, and they call Medjugorje the confessional of the world, rightly so. It was good to see that that's been a big part of your story, and then just tying in with that, it was lovely to hear your take on forgiveness, because really it's really central and key to this whole thing we call Christianity. It really is the key that kind of unlocks the whole story. Without it, we're not really going anywhere. So I really appreciated that coming out strongly in your own conversion story. So thank you for sharing that, and just thought that was worthwhile highlighting.
Yeah, it's a hard lesson I had to learn myself, and but the Lord taught me that lesson, and it's ongoing. I mean, it's every day, and that's what sets us apart. That's what sets Christians apart. Is that that challenge that God gives us about forgiveness. I mean, no other religion, no other, of course, which are all man-made, has that requirement. This coming from God Himself. So it's a command. It's not a choice.
Amen. So listen, on that note, Donal, I think I've kept you long enough, as I say this evening. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your time on behalf of our Divine Mercy prayer group here in the north of Belfast and our little ministry that we do here. Thank you again for taking the time to come on and share your story. And please God, our paths will perhaps cross again. You're always welcome down here in the north if you ever find yourself down here to visit us here. And likewise, I'm sure we'll be back at the conference next year, if not before, for something.
Yes, Father, and it was lovely to meet you, Father, and Stephen as well, at Divine Mercy conference. And there's a reason for it all. I believe the Lord is in it all. And it's lovely to connect with a group like yourselves in Belfast, and I do look forward to meeting you. I think I will be in Belfast in a few months' time, so it'd be lovely to meet with you, if we have the opportunity to do so.
Happy days, please God. All right, or maybe we'll meet in Medjugorje. I know Stephen and a lot of them are planning to go out in May at some time, but maybe we'll have the blessing of meeting out there. So listen, Donal, how we go out here, we just simply conclude by saying thank you to for those whoever's found their way here. We have a growing and lovely community online here on the channels, And so we simply just end by saying until next time here on the channel, peace, love, and God bless.
God bless you, Father. Good night.